you to do so. Let the chairman know when you want to speak through the chat function. The chairman will introduce speakers in the order that the request to speak was made, unless there is a point of order which will be prioritised. Minimise all distractions while you are in the meeting. Please mute your microphone when not speaking, and consider turning your video off to reduce interference on the auto feed. Bear in mind there is a lag between speakers and other attendees hearing you, so please bear this in mind. Presentations, images, video footage should have been made available to you in advance of the meeting and will be visible on the screens. Please indicate via the chat function whether you have a problem with these. Please quote page and slide numbers if referring to a document. If we have part 2 business, and that is business in private session, please make sure that it is your responsibility to make sure that your venue and your connection is private. If you lose connection to this meeting at any point and unable to immediately reconnect, please call the meeting facilitator, which is myself, for this evening. Members have been provided with a telephone number to call me directly in the council chamber and a mobile phone number. I can confirm that the meeting is quorate, and I will now hand over to the chairman for this meeting. Thank you very much, Mrs. Scattergood.
Thank you very much, Emma. At the start of this meeting, following the introduction by the meeting facilitator, I'll say, good evening, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the Planning Committee. My name is Wendy Scattergood, Councillor Wendy Scattergood, and I'm the chairman of this committee, and I am chairing this meeting this evening. As you know, the council is new to virtual meetings, so I'd ask everyone to be patient and understanding as we feel our way through this new way of working. I am being assisted by a governance officer and a meeting facilitator who will help me identify when people want to speak and manage the notifications through the chat function. I obviously can't see all of you, so please let me know using the chat function if there are any issues on your internet connection. Silence will be taken as assent during this meeting. To manage this virtual environment, I will go through the list of participants. Which I've mislaid right this moment. If you bear with me, I need to find that list. I'm so sorry.
Chairman, on your behalf, I can confirm the participants for you.
If you would, please, because I've got so many papers and I've mislaid it. I am so sorry.
You're welcome. Chairman, you have 3 officers of the planning department with you this evening. You have Chris Paggi, who's the development manager, and he is accompanied by Matthew Wild and Tim Havers, who will all be making presentations to you this evening. In terms of your governance support, you have myself, Emma Wisby, you have Alison Webb, who is the minute taker, and you have Jessica Mann, who will be reading the public question time statements for you. In terms of your meetings, the planning committee consists of the following members: Councillor James Abbott, Councillor Kevin Bowers, Councillor Tom Cunningham, Councillor Patrick Horner, Councillor Hilton Johnson, Councillor David Mann, Councillor Mrs. Ina Parker, Councillor Frankie Ritchie, yourself, Councillor Mrs. Gabrielle Spray, Councillor Nick Unsworth, Councillor Justin Wrench. And we do have just one apology this evening, Chairman, and that is from Councillor Andy Munday.
He's just joined the meeting according to the chat.
Oh, thank you very much, Chairman. I have not noticed that. Chairman, if I may, could I just ask Councillor Munday just to confirm his connection, please, just by giving an indication. Councillor Munday?
I'm present at the meeting.
Thank you very much, Councillor Munday. Chairman, these are all your attendees and the presenting officers for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emma. Now I will start the meeting business. First item is apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies for absence?
Chairman, we are all present. Thank you.
Item 2, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? If so, please let me know you wish to speak via the chat function. Councillor Mrs. Spray.
Thank you, Chairman. I will declare an NPI on item D, that's application 2000155, land north of Slamsey's Farm, Great Notley. As the portfolio holder for planning, I have been present at previous presentations and discussions about this item, but I will remain and vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Abbott, are you indicating you wish to speak later, or are you saying you have an interest? I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, I have an interest to declare. It's Part B, E, 95 Newland Street, Wissenham Countryside Society made a representation. It's an NPI, as I'm an ordinary member of that society and didn't have any involvement in that representation, so I'll stay and vote.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Tom Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'd like to declare an enhanced non-pecuniary interest in item 5D, which is the land north of Slamsley's Farm. As Chairman of the Horizon 120 Reference Group and Cabinet Member for Economic Development and Infrastructure, I have spoken in favour of GridServe's venture, and also in recent months have attended a workshop with officers on behalf of BDC and representatives of Essex County Council and the GridServe company themselves to discuss common objectives. So, Madam Chairman, I will not partake in the debate for that item. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Does anyone else have a declaration to make? I'll now move on to item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. I have the minutes of the 3rd of March. Do members have any objection to the approval of those minutes? If so, please let me know via the chat function. Silence means they have been agreed. Thank you very much. Now we will move to the business of the meeting. And we come to item 5, which is the planning items. We do have 2 items in part B that we could unblock. That is item F and item H. Does any member wish to move that we move those 2 items on block?
David Mann, Chairman, so move.
Councillor Mann is moving them. Do I find a seconder for those 2 items?
Move, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Johnson. Those 2 items have been agreed and have been approved. If anyone is unsure as to why we've done that, the item F was a member of staff, and our rules say that any application by a member of staff has to come to this committee, whether it meets policy or not. Item H, the agent, is related to the member of the staff. Both these items meet our policies, and therefore they have both been approved. Thank you, members. That now brings us to the items under Part A. And the first application under Part A is application 1802023 VAR, White Court, Braintree Road, Shelford. This item is going to be presented by Matthew. Sorry, I need to get to my other pages. Matthew, would you like to make your presentation, please?
Thank you, Madam Chairman, of course. Bear with me 2 minutes while I just share my screen. Okay, so this application seeks a variation to condition 2 of 18/00278/REM to reduce the access visibility display requirement from 2.4 metres by 120 metres in both directions to 2.4 metres by 73 metres in both directions. before I show you the presentation, I think it's important to establish the background to this application. The site in its totality has been subject to a number of applications, notably 15/01117/OUT and 18/00278/REM, which propose to retain the existing dwelling at the site and erect 4 new dwelling houses. So we have the outline approval and then the reserve matters approval. A separate application has also been approved, which is reference 18/01124/full for the demolition of the existing dwelling at the site and the erection of 2 houses. As such, in total, the site would provide 6 dwellings, all of which would share the same access. As part of the 4 dwelling applications, the visibility spray requirements were 2.4 metres by 120 metres in both directions, which to achieve would have meant the removal of some of the fencing and hedging at the front of the adjacent to the site access. However, as part of the 2 dwelling application, it was agreed with Essex Highways that the visibility splay for the access could be reduced to 2.4 metres by 73 metres in both directions. As a consequence, no hedging or fencing is now required to be removed to facilitate the visibility splay. As such, this variation application merely seeks to ensure consistency across all applications at the site in respect of the access visibility splays. So I will move through the presentation, so hopefully it will become a bit clearer as to what I'm talking about. So this is the site plan of the variation that is before members this evening. You can see the 4 dwellings that I was discussing, which has been approved, and the access. I will also point out the existing dwelling at the site, or which was there. If I now move to page 3, page 3 shows the 4 dwellings that I just referred to, but also the 2 dwellings of which were part of the separate application, which approved the lower visibility display. As you can see, they are all using the same access. So the point of this application, this variation application, is, as I say, to ensure consistency across all decisions on this site. Just a couple of site photos. Now moving on to page 4. So this is a photo looking at the junction with Braintree Road and Church End. The application site is ahead of me in this area over here, and you can just see the sort of fencing and some of the trees and hedging in the distance. Moving on to page 5, this is just a photo of the existing access at the site. I would actually like to quickly go back to page 4. I just want to talk about the hedging and the fencing in particular, because I know this was raised as a point of contention with the parish council, and that they wish to see the fencing and hedging removed as per the original agreement, but as part of this application it is to be retained. This is because it is now no longer needed to be removed to facilitate the visibility display. So officers cannot reasonably require the applicant to remove the hedge or the fencing now. So before it was a requirement, now it's not, and as I say, it's not a reasonable requirement to make them remove it. So while the parish council's concerns are noted, that is officers' view on the application. And finally, move on to page 6, just a summary. Just to reiterate, I won't go through it all, but just to say that the 2 dwelling application and the 4 dwelling application are both intrinsically linked, both use the same access, and this application is to tie in the 4 dwelling application with the 2 dwelling application in terms of the access visibility display. Essex Highways have no objection to the application, and as such, the recommendation before members tonight is that the application is approved. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions.
Chairman, could you please put your microphone on, please?
Thank you, Matthew. Does any member wish to speak on this item?
Chairman, it's Councillor Spray here. I did indicate on the chat function I'd like to speak. Can I go ahead, please?
Yes, certainly.
Thank you. Well, I think this is a relatively straightforward one to start with. It's basically a highways matter, and highways have commented that they have no objection to this. I don't have much more to say except it makes a change for us to be hopefully approving the retention of hedging for an application rather than removing it. I'm perfectly happy with it, and I will move officer's recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Does it find a seconder before I move on?
Can I ask a quick question? I have indicated on the chat I'd like to ask a quick question.
But the thing is, I need a seconder before I can move on. It has been moved by Mrs. Spray, but I cannot move on until we have a seconder.
Councillor Tom Campbell.
Councillor Abbott, yes, I'll second it.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott. That has been moved by Councillor Mrs. Spray and seconded by Councillor Abbott. Councillor Unsworth, you wish to speak?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. On slide 5, I think it was, there were some trees on the outside of the image. Can the officers confirm whether they are part of the application or whether they are highways? Because as they get bigger, they would restrict it, and would like to see some sort of measure to make sure they do not become restrictive whilst reducing the visibility and the length of the view of the traffic. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Unsworth. I will ask Matthew to answer that question.
Thank you, Councillor Unsworth. Would you like me to bring the PowerPoint slides back up just so you can point out which trees that you are referring to?
Yes, please, if you could just, it's just slide 5, it was just very quickly.
Are we talking about this tree here?
I'm waiting for it to catch up at the minute. Yes, that's just correct. Next to the Harris fencing there.
Yeah. I believe that is outside of the application site from recollection. Just double checking for you. Actually, no, I do think it is just within the application site. So, I mean, what I would say is that Essex Highways they've been to the site, they've looked at the access, and they're satisfied that the visibility can be achieved with the retention of all existing fencing and hedging. So I appreciate, of course, what you're saying, but of course we have to be led by the relevant authority in making a decision on this application, and they're saying it's okay, so it should be okay.
Yeah, sorry, Madam Chair. Yeah, but trees grow, and if that one's not maintained, even though the access has been, the view for traffic has been reduced, that will start to restrict it. Can we put some form of comment on there that the trees are maintained to help support the exit and entry view of the traffic?
Thank you, Councillor Unsworth. Just give me just a couple of minutes, if that's okay.
Councillor Unsworth, It's Chris Padgey here, just coming in on that question. If you could just give us a minute or so, we're just going to double check the proposed block plan, just to clarify the exact location of the tree in relation to the visibility display. So if you could just give us a second just to do that, we'll between Matthew and I, we'll just check the plan for you.
Members, while this matter is being checked by us, we are going to adjourn the meeting briefly at 7:34. That's 7:34 by my count on my clock. Could the webcast please be paused? Thank you. Can webcast?
Hi, Emma. Yep, it's now live again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, members. We now reconvene this item, which is item 1802023 VAR, and it is now 19:37. Thank you, Chairman. I now hand back to officers. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you, councillors. Thank you, Councillor Unsworth, for just bearing with us there. We've just gone back to double check the actual block plan. So the photograph that hopefully you can all see shows the tree in question. Members will just be able to hopefully make out the pavement, and then there's an angled section of grass that you can see that in the distance is slightly narrower and it widens out towards the fence. The tree itself that Councillor Unsworth, I think you're querying, is the one closest to the grass area. Looking at the block plan, the visibility splay runs along that angle where the grass has been cut. So the actual tree would be outside of the scope of the visibility splay based on the block plan. So hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you.
Councillor Abbott, you've indicated you'd also like to speak. Would you like to speak now, please?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. I agree with Councillor Mrs. Spray that it's unusual we're in a situation reversed to what we normally are. So we're actually keeping more hedging in this one with a shorter visibility display. So I'm very happy to support this application.
Thank you, Councillor. Does anyone else wish to add anything further or new to this application? Councillor Mrs. Parker.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, I also support this application. It would seem to be unreasonable to continue to require a larger visibility display when a shorter display has been agreed for the other site using the same access. So I'm happy to support the application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anyone else wish to add anything further before I move the recommendation? Well, members, it has been moved and seconded that we grant this application. It was moved by Councillor Mrs. Spray and seconded by Councillor Abbott. All those that are in favour, I'll go to you individually for you to vote on this application. Firstly, Councillor Abbott, are you in favour?
For.
Councillor Bowers.
For.
Councillor Cunningham.
For.
Councillor Horner. Councillor Horner.
Yes, for.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
For.
Councillor Mann.
For.
Councillor Monday.
For.
Councillor Mrs. Parker.
For.
Councillor Ritchie.
For.
Councillor Unsworth.
For.
Councillor Wrench.
For.
Thank you very much, members. That application has been granted. It was granted unanimously. Thank you, members.
Chairman, you didn't come to me, it's Councillor Spray.
I am so sorry, Councillor Spray. I've written a list and I've forgotten to lift.
It's all right, don't worry.
So sorry.
It's okay. I'm for.
You're for.
So I moved it. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, that application has been granted. Thank you very much indeed. Before we move on to the next application, I'd like to go back to the minutes. When we had the trial last week, I was told that silence meant we were all in agreement. Now, this evening, I've been asked to actually take a vote on the minutes. So I'm going to go through the procedure I've just been through. All those in favour of agreeing the minutes. Councillor Abbott.
For.
Councillor Bowers.
For.
Councillor Cunningham.
For.
Councillor Horner. Councillor Horner. Councillor Horner, are you there? I'll move on. Councillor Johnson. Oh, you are there. Thank you, Councillor Horner. Thank you. Councillor Johnson. Councillor Johnson.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Mann.
For.
Councillor Monday.
For.
Councillor Parker.
For.
Councillor Ritchie.
For.
Councillor Mrs. Spray.
For.
Councillor Unsworth.
For.
Councillor Wrench.
For.
The minutes have been approved unanimously. Thank you, members. I'll now come back to the planning applications. Right, members. In future, silence for the minutes will be the way we're going to do it. But I do need to go through the vote on the two items we unblocked. So we go back to the two items that were unblocked, and I call for a vote on those. Councillor Abbott.
4.
Councillor Bowers.
4.
Councillor Cunningham.
4.
Councillor Horner. Councillor Horner. I'll move on to Councillor Johnson. I'll come back to Councillor Horner in a moment. Councillor Johnson.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Mann.
4.
Councillor Monday.
4.
Councillor Mrs. Parker.
4.
Councillor Ritchie.
4.
Councillor Unsworth.
4.
Councillor Wrench.
4.
Councillor Mrs. Spray.
4.
I go back. Councillor Horner, are you there?
Yes, 4.
4. Thank you very much indeed. So those two items granted unanimously. Thank you, members. Now I move on to the next item on Part B, which is item 19010484, proposed conversion of existing barn to a single dwelling house and construction of detached open bay garage alongside new vehicle access, parking, landscaping and associated works. We also have a listed building application with this. I'm going to take both items together, and this item is going to be presented by Chris Padgett, but we do have a recording of Ellen doing the presentation, but Chris will answer any questions. So can we go to the recording, please?
Good evening, members. Thank you, Chair. Yes, the case officer for this application, Ellen Cooney, has done a pre-recorded presentation, which I'll play to you in a second. I'll just share my screen, and then I'll pick up any questions. One thing to mention at this point, and I'll return to it at the end of the presentation, is we do have some additional conditions that we are recommending, but I will come back to that at the end of the presentation. Okay, I'll press play on the presentation now.
Good evening, members and members of the public. My name is Ellen Cooney and I'm a planning officer for Braintree Council and the case officer for this application. The application is for the proposed conversion of an existing barn to a single dwelling and the construction of a new detached open bay garage alongside vehicular access, parking, landscaping and other associated works. I've numbered each slide at the bottom of the slides, just due to the nature of the virtual meeting, so hopefully everybody will be understanding of where we are at each point. So slide number 2 is the location plan. Buck Farm is located outside of the Black Knockley development boundary on Buck Hill. Slide 3 shows the proposed block plan. This shows the proposed new access here to the barn for conversion and the proposed carport. It also shows the proposed amenity space, which is here where my cursor is, and that will comprise 105 square metres. Slide 4 shows the existing elevations of the barn. And slide 5 shows the proposed elevations of the barn. As you can see with the glazing, this was inserted to avoid cutting into the historic frame of the barn. And the original doors to the side elevations here and here have been pinned back and floor to ceiling glazing has been inserted. This side elevation here, which faces barns being retained by Buck Farm, the glazing has been partially obscured to protect occupier and neighbouring amenity. The single storey addition on this side elevation here, within the T-shape of the barn, was previously approved and has been made into a clear and obvious addition to protect the form of the barn. Slide 6 shows the proposed floor plans. The first floor of the barn will be self-supporting to avoid damaging the historic frame. The proposal is for a spacious 2-bedroom dwelling, and which offers a good level of internal amenity space and outlook. The doors that can be seen in these floor plans on this elevation and both side elevations here have been pinned back in line with the elevation shown on slide 5 that they have been opened. This is slide 7, which is for the proposed outbuilding elevations. This is a simple design and there will be space for 2 cars. Slide 8 shows the proposed new access to the barn. This is adjacent to the back of the existing barns being retained by Buck Farm. So you'll come in here. The following slides show some photos of the existing site. So this slide 9 is the existing side elevation of the barn, and this you can just see where it attaches to one of the barns being retained by Buck Farm. Slide 10 just shows one of the buildings being retained by Buck Farm, which is attached to that existing side elevation. And slide 11 shows the open carport which faces the that side elevation. This courtyard here will also be retained by Buck Farm, so that will not be within the new barn's ownership. Slide 12 shows the opposite side elevation, and these doors will be pinned back and the glazing inserted here, and this is the area where that single story extension will be located. Slide 13 just shows that the opposite side to that side elevation. And slide 14 shows the relationship of the rear elevation of the barn to Buck Farm. Slide 15 shows the view from that side elevation, and part of this will become the amenity space for the dwelling. Slide 16 shows the front elevation of the existing barn. And slide 17 shows the proposed access, which will go in behind the existing barns being retained by Buck Farm. And slide 18 just shows the view from that proposed access up to Buck Farm on Buck Hill. Slide 19 is additional and variation of some conditions that are not in the existing report that has been provided. So additional surveys to identify the presence or absence of any bats or reptiles has been required prior to the commencement of development. If species are found to be present, then measures will be taken in line with the mitigation hierarchy, and this will need to be presented in a method statement. If it is identified from these surveys that bats are present, then an EPS licence will be required, and this will be requested alongside the surveys. A construction environmental management plan, which will include a risk assessment, method statements, and details of works being overseen by specialist ecologists, will also be requested prior to the commencement of development. A wildlife sensitive lighting and design scheme is also being requested to prevent bat disturbance, and a biodiversity enhancement strategy for protected species will be secured by pre-commencement condition. After further discussion with our historic buildings consultant, we have decided to request samples of external materials for the barn and carport, and that will be a variation of the wording of condition 3 of the full and the listed building consent. So to conclude, the proposal would secure the preservation of the heritage asset without detrimental harm to its historic fabric, character or appearance. The conversion would create a well-designed dwelling with a good level of internal and external amenity. Safe and satisfactory vehicular access will be provided together with adequate parking, and officers are satisfied that the scheme is acceptable subject to conditions as set out in the agenda. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Chris, before I go to the members, as you are answering questions, you wish to add anything further?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just to reiterate, the recommendation for the application for full planning permission is with the additional conditions that Ellen's just run through, and the variation of condition 3, which relates to materials, and similarly a variation of condition 3 for the listed building consent application, the linked application for listed building consent. I do have a copy of the presentation. If members would like me to return to any of the slides, I see Councillor Abbott just raised a question around one of the images appeared slightly blurred, so I'm happy to return to any particular slide in the presentation or just run through the plans again if any members would like me to do so. So happy to answer any questions as well. Also, just to clarify, the additional ecology conditions that we're recommending, they arise primarily out of the phase 1 habitat survey that was submitted with the application. We would ordinarily require additional survey work up front to accompany the application during the lifetime of the application. However, in this particular circumstance, as an exception, we are comfortable with recommending a pre-commencement condition for that additional for those additional surveys, which would then inform potential mitigation as well. So hopefully that's clear. But as I said, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Does anyone wish to indicate on the chat line that they wish to add any further questions? I'll come to open this up to members. Councillor Abbott.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, as the officer picked up, some of the slides were coming through, certainly from my screen, with the text rather blurred, but thank you for his offer, but I got enough information to know what decision to make on this, but it was just a point to note in future, really. All of the additional points I was going to make actually were picked up by the officer in terms of the additional conditions. I was wondering about bats because these type of buildings, particularly in rural or semi-rural areas, often do attract bats. So all of the conditions on that look good, and the biodiversity enhancement. So I'm happy to move officer recommendation with those additions.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott. Does anyone wish to second this application before I move on?
I'm quite happy to second that application. I agree with Councillor Abbott.
I'm sorry, I didn't pick it. Oh, is that who's speaking? I'm sorry, I didn't catch.
Councillor Munday.
Councillor Monday. Can you just say your name when you speak, like when you're seconding, please, Councillor?
Apologies, Chairman.
That's all right. We're all learning. Councillor Abbott has moved the recommendation and Councillor Monday has seconded it. Does any other members wish to make any comments on these two applications? Councillor Mrs. Spray.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yes, I support this. I think, as the officer mentioned in the report, the reliance on car use in this location does weigh against it, but on the other hand, the use of the building becoming residential rather than being a redundant building is a plus. It's actually, I think, a really attractive looking barn. I like the design. I think it's a very good mix of the original barn with new modern additions. I think it fits very well. I do think it's very important that the materials used are closely scrutinised, and I fully agree with the additional ecology conditions as well. But I'm supportive of it. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Spray. Councillor Mann, did you wish to add anything as you're not on the chat line?
Thank you, Chair. There is the precedent of the previous consent. It's been properly marketed in the past. And I agree with the conclusions of the officer report. So happy to support the recommendation, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Councillor Ritchie, do you wish to speak?
No, thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak? Well, members, Councillor Mrs. Parker.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, just very briefly, I have also noted that there was a previous permission which has lapsed, which obviously is a material consideration, as the officer has noted in the report. I think the main issue previously had been the fenestration and the need to preserve the fabric of the barn and not cut into the timbers. So, and that concern has been addressed with the redesign of the window. So I'm very happy to support this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Parker. Well, members, it has been moved and seconded that we grant this application with the additional conditions for the full application and the variation of condition 3 on both applications. I'm going to move both together. I'm going to ask you to vote if you are in favour of or against this application. Councillor Abbott.
For both the applications.
Councillor Bowers.
For.
Councillor Cunningham.
For.
Councillor Horner. Councillor Horner.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Are you in favour of this application?
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
For.
Councillor Mann.
For both, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Monday.
For both.
Councillor Mrs. Parker.
For both.
Councillor Ritchie.
For both.
Councillor Unsworth.
4 on both, please.
Councillor Mrs. Spray.
4 on both.
And Councillor Wrench.
4 on both.
Thank you very much, members. That application has been granted unanimously. Thank you. I'll now move on to the final one in Part A, and this is application 20/00155, variation. Land north of Slamsey's Farm, Brackley Lane, Great Notley, and this application is going to be presented to us by Tim Havis.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good evening, members. Okay, so I'm just going to share the presentation with you. This is a live presentation, so hopefully the quality should be clear. Okay, so this is an application for the variation of a number of conditions. It relates to the grid serve scheme, which was granted recently, last September. More specifically, it relates to variation of conditions 2, which is the approved plans, condition 3, materials, condition 6, landscaping, condition 7, lighting, and condition 19, Great Crested Newt licence. The original scheme, members will recall, was for electric forecourt comprising of 24 core electric vehicle charging points, energy storage, a mix of ancillary dwell facilities, car parking, landscaping, and access arrangements. The variations would allow updated design drawings, materials, updated materials to the main building, updated landscaping scheme, lighting, which I'll come to later, and updated ecology statement. And this is the site known as land north of Slamsey's Farm, Great Notley. Okay, so the site location plan, the application site is outlined in red. We have the A131 to the east. We have Slamsley's Farm to the south, and then to the west and the north is further countryside. Point to note is that just to the north, immediately to the north of the application site, we have the Horizon 120 site, which has several planning permissions in place, and in fact a local development order now as well for large-scale commercial development. So just a few photos to remind members of the site. The GridServe site is the one you can see at the end of the photo here, where the porta cabin and the machinery is. The earthworks that we see in the foreground here are actually the Horizon 120 site. Both these sites have extant planning permissions which have been implemented. Just a view from further away, so still looking towards GridServe, which is at the far end of the photo. The A131 is on the left-hand side of the photo, behind this hedge line. And then again, we're looking across the Horizon 120 site. So moving on to slide 5. This is just a close-up shot, really. Again, you can see the buildings that are on the right-hand side of the photo are the outer edge of Slamsley's Farm. And then on the left-hand section of the photo, we have GridServe, which is under construction. Okay, so members will recall that originally there was a dried pond on the site, which is this pond here. So the first GridServe application was proposed to put the access road, which came through clips the edge of the pond here, and would have allowed about 2/3 of the pond to be retained. The next two applications that we had was on the land just to the right-hand side of the pond, but also including the pond, was for the Horizon 120 sites, which went through committee recently. The access for those was shown in a slightly different location, which is actually the correct location, which goes through the middle of the pond. So the pond has been drained, it's been filled in. It was done under license. 2 great crested newts were found and were relocated under license within the site. And what the current applicant is now seeking to do is to regularise the GridServe consent so that the access road shown on their plans will be in the correct location. This is just a reminder of the new ecology habitat. This remains unchanged. So again, I'm sure members will recall, but this is actually on the Horizon 120 site at the northern end, adjacent to Great Notley Country Park. We have a large ecology habitat, wetland habitat area, which was designed with input from the Essex County Council ecologist. It's been designed to provide ecology habitat and specifically great crested newt habitat. So we should see quite a substantial net improvement here. And you'll note there is a requirement for this to be provided under both the current application we're considering today, the GridServe application, as per last time round, but also the Horizon 120. So all these schemes require this mitigation to be provided. So just a couple more photos. Again, you can see the GridServe application where the yellow plant, the yellow digger is. I think it's progressed. These were taken some time ago, so I think it has progressed more than this now. And then moving on to slide 9, final photograph. Again, we're just looking at the GridServe site. The building on the left of the photo is one of the modern barns from the adjacent Slamsley's Farm. So in terms of the proposed changes, this is slide 10 that we're on now. They're fairly minor. The first one, we've got the realignment of the access road at the top, which I've just discussed. The second one, down at the bottom, we have there's a loop road that comes into the GridServe site. You'll note now there is a queuing lane, a sort of parking lane that's been added at the bottom here. The idea there is that if people are waiting and all the charging points are full, you actually got space now for vehicles to pull off the loop road and avoid blocking it. So it was just to add some extra capacity. That's required the parking to be slightly rejigged. It's actually allowed for an increase in, I think it's 4 spaces, but it's just been rejigged slightly, so the parking arrangement is slightly different. And then up here, some of the supporting infrastructure has been moved slightly, and you can see the staff car parking spaces, so it's tweaks to the layout really. Slide 11, so there are also some changes to the elevations, or a change really, which is this centre stair court's been widened by approximately 1.5 metres. Slide 12 is showing some elevations. So I think if you look at section 4, which is the second one from the bottom, on the left-hand side of the slide, you can see the stair court there is slightly wider than it was previously. The floor plans are exactly the same, so no difference there. We have these variety of different uses. There's a sort of limited retail element, some shared office space where you could hot desk while your car is charging, and then there's a sort of multi-use space at the top of the building. That's identical to what was previously approved. Just a close up of the proposed elevations again. This is slide 14 that we're on now. And then finally, soft landscaping specifications. So last time around, there was a condition for landscaping. One of the changes that they've asked for is that's now a compliance condition. So because we've been dealing with this variation application, the applicant's actually submitted information to change a number of conditions to compliance conditions rather than conditions that still require further information. So slide 16, the summary. These are minor revisions to a previously approved proposal. We have the realignment of the access road so that it accords with the granted schemes at Horizon 120. We have a minor extension to the stairwell, redistribution of the parking spaces, which has allowed the queuing lane to be added. And then in terms of conditions, updating conditions, archaeology conditions have been reduced because they've actually completed their archaeology work, so they've just got their final report to hand in. The timing of the new pond, so that new pond that we looked at showed on the slide originally, the idea was that would be provided before the existing pond was removed. The proposal now is to provide that in June. I think that may be under further review given the COVID-19 situation. But the crucial point is it will be provided post removal of the new pond rather than in advance of it. Landscaping, as I showed you the plan, so that will be a compliance condition to comply with the details on the plan. Materials, they've actually submitted their materials, so the materials condition would change to a compliance condition rather than samples to be required. And the same for their SUDS drainage scheme. They've already dealt with that, and County SUDS have signed that off. The final point that I wanted to make was in relation to lighting. So you'll note at the start, it states that they're applying to change that to a compliance condition, but that's not something that we can recommend at this stage. And the lighting condition's still on the agenda as a live condition. And the reason for that is the county ecologist and the environmental health officer have been working together to try and find a lighting sort of scheme they're both comfortable with. We haven't quite reached that point yet. So it's recommended that we leave that as a condition. And importantly, the drawing, there's a lighting drawing which is listed on the agenda as the second approved plan. You'll note it was listed as revision and then there was no number, it was just a series of X's. The idea was that we might have been able to reach agreement prior to the committee, but then with the COVID-19 situation, we were unable to. So the recommendation is that lighting plan is just deleted and we leave the condition in place. I have no late reps and no other updates. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
There at the moment. Councillor Ritchie, did you wish to speak on this item?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I would like to speak, but could I just see if there's any questions that want to be asked first, please, if that's okay?
I've got no one wanting to ask anything. Oh, Councillor Abbott. Councillor Abbott, I'll come to you first then.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, the officer answered the question I was going to ask about the lighting condition, because yes, I noticed version XXXX, which was a bit curious. I had a look at the plan this afternoon, revision 4, and I have to say, if that was granted, this thing would look like a spaceship in the landscape. I mean, the lighting levels are extraordinary. They're what you'd expect on a sports ground. The spill on the boundaries is up to 70 lux, was absolutely extraordinary. I mean, normally you'd be looking to keep it down at 1 lux or less. There's no information at all I can see on precise design, upward light ratio, dimming controls, colour temperature, nothing. So could I ask, I don't know if it's possible, Madam Chairman, but could I ask if when we do get lighting details which are submitted, could that be shared with the committee? Because this is going to be a really important flagship development, and all of the sustainability aspects should be to a very high standard. I mean, obviously the principles are a really good one of the electric charging of vehicles, but as things stand, if it was built with this lighting, it would negate, I think, to a significant extent, the sustainability credentials. The other 2 points I wanted to raise was, I think the landscaping, to be honest, is rather disappointing. And I know we discussed this previously, the loss of the trees and hedges. And it's very disappointing to see yet again in the officer report, you know, all the trees just described as poor quality, therefore they can come out. I mean, is there anything more we can do to actually achieve net gain on site? Because I think there's a bit of offsetting going on here, isn't there? They're sort of assuming that it's going to be the Horizon 120 site that provides the environmental benefit, but I'd like to see it actually on this site. And that brings me on to my third point. Members may recall I raised it at Planning Committee and also raised it at the H120 reference group, and I should declare I'm a member of that, about the pond and the fact that these ephemeral ponds can get water back in them, and sure enough this one did, and it has had newts in it, as was reported to the H120 group. Now, I think it's really disappointing that the District Council is involved in basically destroying a great crested newt habitat. Now, I hear what the officer says, that the new pond may provide alternative habitat, and I'd really hope it does, but there's absolutely no ecological guarantee that will be the case. So I think my two main things are, can we see the lighting details when they come in? And secondly, what more can we do to achieve net gain actually on site rather than try to offset it? Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott. Councillor Abbott, I will ask Chris Padgey to answer some of those questions, please. And then if Tim wishes to add something as well, but.
Thank you, Chairman. Just coming back on the, I'll let Tim respond on the landscaping and the pond in more detail. But on the first question in relation to the lighting, so the condition recommended will require those details to be submitted for approval by what we call a discharge of condition application. Some councils refer to them as approval of details. That is an application that would be dealt with under delegated powers by officers. It would be a technical examination of the detail, and as Tim has explained, officers have been in conversation with both the ecological advisors but also on the lighting side as well to try to reach a satisfactory solution. So my advice would be that this is a matter of detail that would be dealt with by officers should members decide to grant the variation application this evening. I'll let Tim come back on the substance of the landscaping and on the mitigation around the great crested newts. But I think just 2 points just for myself just to add in response to those the two questions. Firstly, in terms of the tree loss, is of course that is obviously regrettable for this particular site. In large part, that has been down to the new access being created to serve the actual GridServe site itself, and obviously that has to be weighed against the very high sustainability benefits arising from this particular proposal. I think I'm right in saying that we still remain on course, should members decide to grant this application, to be the first authority in the country, the first area to actually have a GridServe site that would be up and running. So this is, very significant in terms of providing new, more sustainable means of travel and helping to facilitate an electric car fleet. So while that tree loss is regrettable, it was required in order to provide the necessary visibility displays to achieve a safe and satisfactory vehicular access into the site. And as I said, I think I would advise members that loss needs to be weighed against the sustainability benefits arising from this particular proposal. In terms of the mitigation around the pond, absolutely accept the point that Councillor Abbott has said. I think just having been involved, very closely involved with the Horizon 120 proposals and the local development order, I do have to say that in terms of what the authority is putting in place for the wider site is very substantial in terms of mitigation, and that will achieve a very enhanced ecological feature for the wider site above and beyond actually what we're actually losing in this particular location. It's been specifically designed around great crested newts and other reptiles and amphibians to provide a habitat. So a lot of design thought has gone into that particular mitigation for the wider scheme, which obviously GridSurf will link into as well. So absolutely, while the loss is regrettable, I would just really like to highlight that as an authority in terms of bringing forward the Horizon 120 proposals, it is actually very substantial what's been put in place for the wider site. I'll pass over on that point to Tim just to come back on the details of the landscaping and any further comments around the Great Crested Newt point as well.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, I think sort of fair points that you've raised there. The real issue with the GridSurf site is the size of it. It's not a large site, and they're quite constrained with regards to the amount of landscaping that they can put in place there. I think the point that Councillor Abbott made, or sort of suggested in terms of we were looking at the wider Horizon 120 site, is correct. We are looking at the bigger picture here because these sites do have a shared access. So the landscaping scheme that's there is as good as we can get it, but it's not a big site, and I think it's not a site where we've got lots of space where we could have requested a large amount of tree planting. The pond, in terms of the habitat, it does meet the requirements of Natural England's licence. They had the ability, I think, to relocate up to 50 great crested newts, and they did only find 2. And they were relocated to the northern part of the site where this really substantial ecology habitat area is going to be. So although I agree it's regrettable that that the habitat was lost, there is a positive insofar as there are obviously newts in the area, and I think there is a strong feeling that from the ecology perspective we can create a really decent habitat area up there that will be quite large, professionally managed, and substantially better than the pond that was there, given that the pond that was there had obviously dried out for quite a prolonged period of time. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Tim. I've now got Councillor Bowers to speak.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It's kind of following on from what Chris was saying also, is we need to remember what a game changer this development is for the district. And it's in the conclusion of the report about it being a cutting edge proposal with significant benefits in terms of making a real difference. And I'm all for that, and definitely support this application. Just a quick question in regards, I know these are minor amendment, and I don't think Tim did say that we had any more in the report. He says the Great Notley Parish Council hadn't made any comments at the time of writing the report. Have we heard anything from the Parish Council or not? Thank you.
Tim, have we had anything from the Parish Council?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, we have. I'm just checking because the report was updated to include that. So let me just check. The original report said no comment, and then they provided what was essentially a late rep, which then became in-time rep for this new committee. So I just want to double check that that's actually in there. Okay, it's not. I can tell you what it was. The concern was over lighting. It was pretty much along the lines of what Councillor Abbott said. They wanted to the Braintree District Council to ensure that lighting wasn't excessive. I think their focus was actually on residents on the far side of the A131. But just to emphasise on the lighting, we've got the county ecologist and the EHO, the environmental health officer, working together on that. And in terms of things like soft lighting, details of shielding, and just the amount of detail that's actually required before that condition could be agreed, we're not there yet. So the plan that Councillor Abbott was referring to, which doesn't actually have enough detail on it, it is certainly not one that we would approve. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Councillor Unsworth.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It's just a very quick one to pick up on something that was said during the presentation. It said that the east elevation, the grid serve stairwell, was widened by 1.5 metres. Do we know the reason for that? Because that does actually seem to make it quite dominant, and picking up on the comments from the local council in terms of that dominating and affecting the residents across the road. Could officers ask if there's any idea why they've widened it to make it so dominant?
Do we know?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think it was to do with building regulations. I'm not certain. I think that it was to do with building regulations, but I'm not absolutely certain on that. The only point that I would say, though, is it is some distance from residents in terms of it being overbearing, etc. And there is a bit of an embankment along the A131 there, so it's not as though it's in extremely close proximity.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Councillor Mrs. Spray.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I would agree strongly with one of the points that Councillor Abbott made and disagree with another point he made. I'll start with the one that I disagree with, which is around the pond. I do think that there are good ecological improvements being made on this site, given the constraints around the size and the shape and so on. Pages 53 and 54 on the agenda describe the new water habitat, new grassland and shrub planting and so on, which will all be to the benefit, to the good. So I think they are doing as good a job as they possibly can in order to, to improve the ecological side of things. I agree strongly with his comments on lighting. It's described on pages 47 under the BDC ecology comments as being excessive, and I think that's a fair point. So, yeah, I'm confident, however, that with conditions that officers can get that right. This is a real feather in the cap for this council. Actually, it has been mentioned, it's the first of its type in the country, so it is a flagship development, and it would be a pity if it was spoilt being lit up. I think Councillor Abbott said like a spaceship. If he didn't say that, then I'm saying it. It would be a shame if that was detrimental, but I'm confident that we can get that right with conditions. Other than that, I think it's it's an excellent development, and I don't have any other problems. If nobody else has moved anything, Madam Chairman, I will move approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Spray. No one had moved it at this stage, so does that find a seconder?
Yes, it does.
Thank you. Councillor Ritchie, do you want to speak now?
Yes, please, Madam Chairman. Thank you. If Councillor Spray hadn't moved it, then I certainly would have after listening to the comments. Just to add to that, I think it is slightly regrettable around the new situation. That pond had been dry in excess of 5 years. It was just kind of poor luck that it was full again, and obviously made resident to a couple of great crested newts. I think the measures we've taken to move those to an alternate site, and the provision that the adjoining site will make towards the overall ecology for that site, I think does considerably outweigh the current impacts that development is having. So on the grounds that they've requested for the variation and subject to the lighting conditions that they will be returning their plans on, I'm more than happy to second this application and move off recommendations for approval.
Thank you, Councillor Ritchie. Councillor Mann, did you wish to add anything or speak on this item?
Well, thank you, Chair. I mean, this is a previously approved scheme. We've approved it, and these are comparatively minor adjustments, and I think that as they stand, they're all acceptable. So I'm happy to support, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. I come back to, Councillor Abbott wishes to speak again. Councillor Abbott?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, just briefly, yes, I did describe it as potentially looking like a spaceship. If you look at the lighting plan I'm looking at, I've got it up on my second screen here. I mean, the lux levels are extraordinarily high, really, really off the scale. There'd be massive spill over the boundaries. No doubt at all that residents on the other side of the main road would see it. So all I'm arguing is that, yes, I definitely support in principle electric car charging, clearly, but I don't see why we can't have that and a really good quality sustainable development per se. I think all sites we're granting should be sustainable. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to abstain on this one because I think the detail just isn't there to say we have got that degree of sustainability we should have, but I certainly support the principle of the development.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mrs. Parker.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chairman. I just had a small question which has really arisen out of the discussion about lighting. Because just condition 1, the approved plans, on page 56 of the agenda include the lighting plan, but obviously there's going to be a subsequent, the lighting plan must be approved by, there's got to be an approval of the lighting plan following amendments to it. I just wanted to check that we're not approving a lighting plan at the moment, are we?
No. No, we're not. It was the updated conditions. But I will just check with Tim. I am correct. No, we're not. Well, members, does anyone else wish to speak on this item? Well, it has been moved by Councillor Mrs. Spray and seconded by Councillor Ritchie that we approve this application with the updated conditions which were on the slide. I'll come to each one of you and I would like you to indicate whether you approve, refuse or wish to abstain. Councillor Abbott?
Abstain.
Councillor Bowers?
For.
Councillor Cunningham?
Not participating, Madam Chairman.
Oh, so sorry, I overlooked that one. Councillor Horner?
For.
Councillor Johnson?
For.
Councillor Mann?
For.
Councillor Monday?
For.
Councillor Mrs. Parker?
For.
Councillor Ritchie?
For.
Councillor Unsworth?
For.
Councillor Wrench?
For.
Councillor Mrs. Spray?
For.
Thank you, members. That application has been granted. Thank you very much. We'll now move on to the Part B applications. The first Part B application is application 190153334. This is ground floor alterations and proposed single-storey rear extension, 95 Newland Street, Witham. We do have a written representation from Witham Town Council, which is going to be read for us by Jessica Mann, who is the Governance and Members Officer. Jessica, can I ask you to read the statement, please?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just one moment. This is a statement on behalf of Witham Town Council. So the Planning Applications and Transport Committee at Witham Town Council was able to review at its meeting on 30th of September 2019 the above referenced application in respect of ground floor alterations and a proposed single-storey rear extension at the commercial premises situated at 95 Newland Street, Witham. As a result of reviewing the application, Witham Town Council recommended refusal on a number of grounds which are detailed at the end of this representation. Following comments made on 23rd of October 2019 by the Historic Environment Team at Essex County Council, revised plans with particular regard to the fenestration came before the Town Council's Planning Applications and Transport Committee at its meeting on 27th of January 2020. However, after reviewing the revised plans, the Town Council remains of the opinion but a number of further concerns which it had originally raised, in addition to those relating to building materials, have not been addressed by submission of those plans. While Whitton Town Council welcomes the fact that the application into use erstwhile vacant premises, it wishes to reiterate that the property in question, although built in the 1960s, occupies a prominent position in the centre of the conservation area, and that therefore any alterations to the building must unequivocally be in compliance with Braintree District Council's own policies, ADM 63/RLP 95 and RLP 96, which references that a building in the conservation area should enhance the character and appearance, and that building materials are authentic and complementary to the building's character. Therefore, Whitton Town Council maintains its position as originally conveyed on 2nd of October 2019 and recommends to Braintree District Council Planning Committee that this application be refused on the following grounds. Timber frame windows and doors should be used in the conservation area. Lack of detail regarding lighting of the front of the building. That the roof of the mortuary should be gabled. There is no information with regard to hours of operation, and there is no clarity as to how access will be achieved into the mortuary. Reference to lack of advice from the listed buildings officer, as indicated in Whitton Town Council's original letter dated 2nd of October 2019, is removed as subsequent correspondence dated 23rd of October 2019 and 3rd of February 2020, has now been submitted by the Historic Environment Team at Essex County Council. And thank you, Chairman. That's the end of the statement.
Thank you, Jessica. I'll now come to the presentation, and the presentation is going to be made by Matthew. Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Bear with me 2 seconds while I just share my screen again. Okay, so the application we're considering tonight is for the ground floor alterations and proposed single-storey rear extension at 95 Newland Street in Whitton. It's to facilitate the change from the vacant former bank to a funeral director's, which can be done under permitted development. Therefore, they're not applying for that. They're only applying for the associated physical works to the building. Note the comments made by Whitton Town Council. I believe they are covered in the report, but I will mention a few of those as we go through the presentation. So moving to page 2, the location plan. As you can see, the site edged in red relates to the bank, or the former bank, on Newland Street. And you can see behind it the shared area, which is used by other units on Newland Street. Moving to page 3, this just gives a closer view of the site and the vehicular access and that shared area that I was referring to. Moving on to page 4, the existing front elevation. Don't worry about the what's said on the plans. I'll talk you through it. So at the moment we've got, it's probably easier to see it really on the picture, which is on page 5. So you've got sort of marbleized cladding here. You've got some timber shop front, but it looks it's very dated. You've got brick, and you've got I think it's timber windows above it. You can see the former ATM slot as well. So the marbleized cladding isn't overly appropriate in the conservation area. Moving on to the existing side elevation, you can just see that the windows are white aluminium framed. Here is brick all the way through. Moving on to page 7, the existing rear elevation, again, it's brick with aluminium windows. You can see the rear access and other elements and the single-storey extensions. Okay, moving on to page 8. This just shows the side and also the rear of the building as existing. Moving on to page 9, again, this just shows the rear of the building, but is slightly further at an angle, looking across some of the other backs of the properties which front onto Newland Street. Okay, moving on to page 10, so the proposed front elevation. So effectively what we're getting is a replacement shop front and rendering. So the design's been through initial, fair few stages. I know the case officer worked quite hard with the applicant and also the historic buildings consultant to come up with a design which was felt to enhance the conservation area compared to what is there previously. So the current design that we're considering tonight removes the fan lights and the panels of marbleized cladding, adds more visual interest, and it adds an aluminium shop front window here, which is sort of broken up, and yeah, it's I think it's worth noting that other shop fronts on Newland Street, certainly very close to the site, are all metal framed, and similarly shop fronts and windows are also metal framed. So obviously take the point raised by Witham Town Council that they wish to see timber in the conservation area. Timber obviously is the sort of historic or traditional material that one would expect in the conservation area. However, given that this unit will not be alone in that it will provide aluminium, actually it would be more in keeping with what's around it rather than actually going for a timber shop front. Moving on to page 11, I just want to point out actually that the building would be rendered at the top. If I move back to page 10, at the top part of it, it would also be rendered. So moving back to page 11, you can see the small extension at the back in the side view, and just a couple of bits like windows being blocked up, etc. Moving on to page 12, the rear elevation. So you can see the extent of the extension here, and that's pretty much all that's changing at the back. Moving on to page 13. So this is just the existing floor plan as it was for the bank. So you can see a couple of meeting rooms, the banking hall, etc. Okay, moving on to proposed floor plan. So substantially the same. The extension element is here. So you can see that it is very small moving forward, and obviously the internally there's been some additional partitions to obviously facilitate the use as a funeral directors. Okay, moving on to page 15, the access. So one of the points that was raised by Witham Town Council was how the site would be accessed and potentially parking. Well, this plan shows it. So you can see the estate car, which is obviously the larger car, can pull into this area here and park. And as I said, the area is shared with other units, but obviously they can park on their own land, and you can sort of see the extension there as well. Okay, moving on to page 16, I am proposing that condition 4 is amended. So the new wording is in red. Basically what we want to do, a brick wall is proposed as part of the application in the rear, but we want to make sure, as well as having control over the external materials and the mortar, we also want to be sort of the brick type in the bond. What we also want to have control over, or further sort of clarity on, is the details of the siting of the brick wall. So we just want to make sure that is all appropriate in the given that it's in the conservation area, and given that rear access where the vehicles will be parked. Okay, on page 17 then, just to sum up, the proposed shop front alterations will not have an adverse impact on the character and appearance of the conservation area. The Council Historic Buildings Consultant has raised no objections to the proposals and states that they would be a benefit to the conservation area. The proposed rear extension would remain in keeping with the building and would not have an adverse impact on the locality. Officers are satisfied that the proposals comply with the adopted policies, and therefore officers recommend that the application is approved planning permission, subject to the amendment to condition 4. And just a couple of points. Lighting was raised as a concern by Witham Town Council, which is actually a condition 3, I believe. And hours of operation would be 9 to 5 as set out in the application form, Monday to Friday. And the Environmental Health Officer raises no objection to the application. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions as necessary.
Thank you, Matthew. Councillor Cunningham, you wish to speak?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, first of all, I think it's pleasing to see a previously redundant retail unit being brought back into commercial life on the main high street in Witham. I think that's encouraging. From a planning point of view, I sympathise with the objections made by Witham Town Council and totally appreciate that it is in a conservation area. But I think in appreciating the conservation area, I think we have to attribute a certain amount of proportion and approach this with a certain degree of proportionality in terms of how we view this planning application. And I think what we've seen in the presentation isn't an application that would clash with neighbouring properties. I do think it's in keeping. Specifically the point about the windows, yes, timber frames perhaps may be more aesthetically pleasing, but again, I don't think that clashes with other properties and their particular windows. I think the condition and the suggestion made by the Town Council regarding the gabling is rather disproportionate and perhaps suggests a personal taste rather than a proportionate material planning consideration. Madam Chairman, I appreciate it's early in the discussion but I'm very happy to move approval of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cunningham. Does anyone wish to second this application before I move on, please?
Well, I'll second, Madam Chairman. It's Councillor Spray.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Spray. Does anyone else wish to speak on this item? Well, it has been moved and seconded by Councillor Cunningham, seconded by Councillor Mrs. Spray, that we approve this application with the amended condition 4. All those in favour, against, or want to refuse, abstain, I will now go through the list. Councillor Abbott.
4.
Councillor Bowers.
4.
Councillor Cunningham.
4.
Councillor Horner.
4.
Councillor Johnson.
4.
Councillor Mann.
4.
Councillor Monday.
4.
Councillor Parker.
4.
Councillor Ritchie.
4.
Councillor Unsworth.
4.
Councillor Mrs. Spray.
4.
Councillor Wrench.
4.
Thank you, members. That application has been granted unanimously. I'll now move on to the other item in Part B, and that is item 1901961 full. Retention of a single-storey outbuilding for continued use as a garden bar, the Vine Public House, Vine Street, Great Bardfield. Once again, we have a statement from a member of the public, which is going to be read by Jessica Mann. Can I ask Jessica if she'll read the statement, please?
Hello, thank you, Chairman. I will just read the statement. Okay, this is a statement in support of the planning application. I would first like to thank all the committee for giving us the opportunity to provide comment in support of this application. The application is regarding the retrospective permission for an outside bar to support the existing business and fully utilise the outside garden area, thus increasing the available selling space. The applicant is my uncle, And when he asked for my opinion, I offered my assistance and in the first instance liaised with the designated planning officer. I noted the objection from the Great Barfield Parish Council, and it is regrettable that my uncle was unaware that engagement with the Parish Council would have likely been proactive, and any concerns that they had could have been addressed at the time. The rationale behind the introduction of an outside bar area was that during the more clement months of the year, the garden area is well used by patrons, and in order to effectively serve this additional area, thus essentially increasing the area of available selling space and provide the much needed income within the business sector that is under increasing pressure, and it is now, with the current pandemic, that the outside area will encourage the recommended social distancing measures and will be considered a huge asset that warrants ongoing investment into a community asset. The applicant is content with the imposition of a condition regarding time restrictions in association with the outside bar use, as this is very much in line with their consideration of their neighbours. I would like to thank the committee again for permitting this statement. A statement on behalf of Ms. Teresa Walker. Thank you, Chairman. That is the end of the statement.
Thank you, Jessica. I now ask Matthew to make the presentation on this application.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Bear with me 1 second while I share the screen for you. Okay, so the application we're considering tonight is for the retention of a single-storey outbuilding for continued use as a garden bar at the Vine Public House in Great Barfield. So the site is edged in red over here. You can see it's in the heart of the village. Okay, page 3 just gives you some context. So the pub is at the front. You've got the pub car park. You've got the listed barn. You've got a public right of way which runs up here in this bit. And then you've got the area of effectively pub garden which runs down at the back here. And I think you can actually see the outdoor pub or outdoor bar, I should say. But I will show you that. Moving on to page 4. So it just gives a very basic overview of what I've just discussed with the car park, the stables, the garden area and the garden bar. Moving on to page 5. This just shows the plans of the building. It's very uninspiring, but it is effectively an outbuilding with a bar in it. This is shown in a second. So this is just moving to page 6. We're looking from the car park towards the rear garden area, and you can see the footpath to my right, to the right. And then page 7 shows the outdoor bar in question. As you can see, it looks a bit like your standard garden shed. And that's where it will be located. So moving on to page 8, there's been no objections from the Environmental Health Officer, and actually no conditions recommended in this case. The bar is in an existing seating area which is controlled by the licence. Conditions to restrict the hours would actually overlap with the licence, which obviously officers are keen to avoid. No objections from the Historic Buildings Consultant, and again no conditions recommended there. The building is small and ancillary in appearance, as I've shown you. There's obviously a benefit to the public house, as was described in the statement at the start, and overall minimal harm, material planning harm identified. As such, officers recommend to members that the application is granted this evening. Happy to answer any questions as necessary. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Councillor Mann, I haven't anyone wishing to speak at the moment. Would you like to speak on this item?
Thank you, Chair. I know the site in in fact. I think in planning terms, there's minimum harm here. I note that there's no objection from the historic building consultant, and the desire of the applicant to cooperate. So I'm happy to move this very small proposal, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Does it find a seconder?
Tom Cunningham, second, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Did you wish to speak, Councillor Cunningham?
Nothing else to add, thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Ritchie, do you wish to make any comments on this?
No, thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to make any comments on this application? Well, it has been moved by Councillor Mann and seconded by Councillor Cunningham that we grant this application. Those in favour of granting the application? I'm going to go through the list again. Councillor Abbott?
For.
Councillor Bowers?
For.
Councillor Cunningham?
For.
Councillor Horner?
For.
Councillor Johnson?
For.
Councillor Mann?
For.
Councillor Monday?
For.
Councillor Mrs Parker?
For.
Councillor Ritchie?
For.
Councillor Unsworth?
For.
Councillor Mrs Spray?
For.
Councillor Wrench?
For.
Thank you, members. That application has been granted unanimously. Thank you very much indeed. That now brings us on to the roundabout advertisements. There are 19 of them, and I really do not intend reading every application number out, but I have asked if we could have a short presentation, as this is a Braintree application, for transparency. So I'm going to hand straight over to Chris for this short presentation, and then we hopefully could vote on them en bloc. But if anyone wants to bring out any single one, then it's up to the members. Thank you. I'll go over to Chris.
Thank you, Chairman. I will just share the presentation with me. Just bear with me a second while I share my screen. Okay, there we go. So just to be clear, members, we're looking at the 19 applications on pages 5 and 6 of the Planning Committee agenda. I'm going to take you on a brief tour around Braintree, Witham, and then just heading slightly into Great Notley and into Cressing. So we have the application numbers displayed on slide number 1. So these are all 19 in the order they appear in the agenda papers. So moving on to slide 2, across the 19 applications, there are effectively 2 signage specification types. The first sign, which is on the left-hand side, the dimensions of the sign are 500 millimetres by 1000 millimetres, and it is 500 millimetres off of the ground. And the sign on the right, which is slightly larger, 650 mil in terms of its height by 1500 mil wide, and slightly lower off of the ground at 400 mil. So across the applications, you'll see those variations on effectively one of those sign types for each of the proposals. So just moving through, so the first application seeks permission for 2 signs. I should say as well, all of the signs are non-illuminated as well. So the first application, 2 non-illuminated signs at the roundabout by the entrance to Freeport. So you can see on the location plan, you've got Braintree Retail Park to the south, and you can just see the corner of Freeport. And hopefully on the roundabout, you can make out the 2 dots, which indicate where the signage is proposed. So that's the first application. Moving on to Fowler's Farm roundabout, so just off of Braintree Road into Cressing. So you have the garden centre, you have the Wyvale Garden Centre to the right-hand side of the roundabout, and then the Geddes Corner itself with the various units slightly to the north. This application seeks permission for 3 of the signs indicated on the right-hand side. So moving over to slide number 5. So the next application, this is the roundabout to the south of London Road. You've got the A120, so you can just see London Road to the south coming off, and you've got the service station just over on the left-hand side. So this application seeks permission for 3 of those signs. Next application, we move over to the Panners roundabout at Great Notley. Not on the main A120 interchange, but the next roundabout down that services Great Notley, but then you've also got the entrance into Skyline, the business park. So this application seeks permission for 2 signs. Moving on to the next application. So to the north of London Road, just where we were a few moments ago. So as you come into Braintree under the A120, 2 signage proposals for this particular roundabout. Moving over to slide number 8, over at Great Notley. So by the Tesco roundabout, 2 non-illuminated signs proposed, and members will be aware of the Horizon 120 site, which is over on the left-hand side. So slide number 9. Just into the Skyline Business Park, so just slightly up the road again. So the first roundabout that serves the actual business park. 2 signages, 2 signs proposed in this particular application. Slide number 10, moving over to Whittam. So roundabout at Tesco by the Grove. 2 signs proposed on this particular roundabout. And again, you've got the signage on the right-hand side. Slide number 11, Great Notley Bypass, 3 non-illuminated signs proposed for this particular roundabout. So here you've got the on-slip and the off-slip for the A120 at Panners. Roundabout at London Road. So as you come into the district, approaching from Chelmsford, again, you've got the Horizon 120 site slightly up the road on the A131 on the left-hand side, and you've got London Road and the entrance into Great Notley on the other exit from the roundabout. 3 signs proposed on this particular application. Slide 13, roundabout at Podsbrook Road, Braintree, so the other entrance coming into Braintree. So you've got the on and off slip from the A120. You can just see the A120 to the south of the roundabout, and you have Podsbrook Road to the north. So 3 signs proposed for this particular application. Slide number 13. Slide number 14, roundabout at London Road, back in Braintree. Just down the road again from where we are. So you've got the entrance to the residential estate to the right, and the new countryside development on the right-hand side at the new roundabout that's been installed there. So 2 signs proposed on that new roundabout. Moving over to the Maltings Lane development in Whittam, roundabout at Gershwin Boulevard, 2 signs proposed. Moving over to the Morrison's roundabout, Braintree Road in Whittam, 2 signs proposed. So you see Morrison's to the north and Braintree Road by the roundabout. And then moving back over to Maltings Lane, roundabout at Hawks Road, you've got Gershwin Boulevard to the south, 2 roundabout signs proposed here, and the Maltings Lane development is to the north. Slide 18. 3 signs proposed for this particular roundabout at Rame Road in Braintree. So just coming up Podsbrook Road, Rome Road, you have the former Broomhills Industrial Estate, and you have the entrance to Springwood Drive Industrial Estate to the north. And I think lastly, or there might be one more after this, roundabout at Bridport Way, Coggeshall Road, Braintree. So the other side of Braintree, you've got the A120 to the right-hand side off the map, and you've got the Marks Farm development to the north and to the south, and you've got Tesco's in the right-hand corner there. You can just see the car park and make out the superstore. So 2 signs proposed for that application. And sorry, there was one more. 3 signs proposed for this particular roundabout. So this is by the Grove in Whittam. So again, you can see the Grove to the left of the roundabout, and again the signage type. Slide number 20. and I think this is the last one, slide 21, roundabout at Mill Hill, Chapel Hill, Braintree. 3 non-illuminated signs proposed here. So again, another key position within Braintree, so just down the road from Freeport. So just to summarise, all of the signage proposed is non-illuminated. It's those 2 separate types of signs that are proposed that I showed you at the start. We have no objections from the County Council on highway safety grounds. Officers consider the impacts on visual amenity is acceptable. Those are the 2 key considerations for advertisement consent applications. And in addition, we've received no representations or objections from members of the public or any parish or town council. So all 19 applications are recommended for approval. Happy to return to any of the slides in particular. If members have any particular questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Chris. Councillor Unsworth, please.
Just a very quick one, and it applies to all of the signs. Do we have any idea how they're installed and what impact on the traffic installing them will have? There doesn't seem to be any details on what they are. I presume it's the same for all of them. Thank you.
Would you like to respond to that, Chris?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Unsworth, for the question. I must admit, I'm not sure in terms of what the proposal would be. It's something. It's certainly, if members are concerned, obviously, the council would have involvement in the installation and would obviously want to minimise any disruption. Should members feel strongly, we could, of course, include an informative to ensure that the views of the committee are come across on the actual decision notice, but I'm afraid I don't know the specific arrangements that are proposed or whether or not that's actually been determined yet by the council.
Thank you. Councillor Abbott.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. 3 things. Firstly, the officer said that 2170 is the Fowler's Farm roundabout, whereas it's listed in the agenda on page 5 as Galleys Corner. Had it been the actual Galleys Corner roundabout, I think quite a few questions would have been raised, A, about safety, and B, about how long the signs would have survived. But that brings me on to my second point, which is, are we going to have these made of sustainable materials? What are they actually made of? Is it recycled plastic? Is it metal? And thirdly, pleased to see that they're not illuminated, because I think that would be an additional distraction as well as wastage of energy. But I am particularly interested in what they're made of. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott. Councillor Bowers wishes to ask a question as well, so I'll let him ask his question, then I'll get Chris to answer both at the same time. Councillor Bowers, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, just a very quick one. Does this mean that all the current ones are all being removed with all these new ones going in? Thank you.
Can I ask Chris if you'd like to answer those 2 questions before I invite other members to speak, if he knows the answer?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm actually just checking the application form, so perhaps if I could just finish going through the application submission. I'm just checking to see on the material detail. As far as I'm aware, all of the existing signs, pre-existing signs on those roundabouts would be removed. But let me just come back on the materials, if that's okay.
Of course. Perhaps what Chris is still looking for that, perhaps I could see if Councillor Mann would like to speak. Councillor Mann, do you want to speak on this item?
Thank you, Chair. Well, I'd like to thank Chris for the tour of possibly the least attractive features in the entire district. But I think the lack of objections from parish, town councils, Highways England, Essex County Council Highways is significant. Therefore, happy to move officer's recommendation, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Does that find a seconder, please?
Yes, Madam Chairman, Councillor Ritchie is happy to second.
Did you wish to speak, Councillor Ritchie?
No, thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you.
Chairman, perhaps if I can come back on the question raised by Councillor Abbott, just in terms of the materials. I've checked the specification plan and I've also checked the application form for a couple of the applications. The materials are specified as a combination of wood, plastic and metal. I don't have any further detail on that in terms of what part of the sign would constitute which material. I would assume that, for instance, the actual body of the sign itself would be a combination of the metal and the plastic, with the wood forming the supports for the sign. But I have no further detail that's been submitted with the application submission. So that's as far as I'm able to answer the question. Hopefully that clarifies the matter, though.
Thank you, Chris. Councillor Abbott, did you wish to come back?
Yes, it might seem a small point, but I think given these are safety critical locations, we perhaps should have detail on that. So just as a suggestion, I'm not against this at all in principle, but as a suggestion, I think we might want a condition just to be sure on what the materials are.
So, do you have a condition whereby officers have to look at the actual materials?
Chairman, I think on the basis of the specification that we do have enough detail in terms of those three materials. I suppose the question that I would pose back to Councillor Abbott is whether or not any of those materials are objectionable from a visual amenity perspective, because obviously with the advertisement consent application, there are two key considerations, highway safety and visual amenity. So the issue is whether or not a combination or any of those particular materials are objectionable in themselves. I think given the size of the signs, where they're located, we've obviously had a careful look at each of the particular locations and are comfortable with the sign and the potential impact. These are very typical signs that you would see on roundabouts and other similar locations. So I think the actual spec that's been provided, I would suggest, is adequate for this particular proposal. We wouldn't ordinarily seek to condition this type of detail. I would accept that the actual application submission could be clearer in terms of what part of the sign, but as I said, my best estimate would be that the body of the sign would be a combination of the plastic and the metal, with the wooden as the supports. I can't imagine the actual body of the sign would be constructed from wood.
Thank you, Chris. Well, it has been moved and second that we grant all these applications, all 19 of them. I'm now going to put it's been moved by Councillor Mann and seconded by Councillor Reddy. Sorry.
So we do have one outstanding question from Councillor Unsworth, please.
Sorry, it's just that you type in Councillor Unsworth when I've already seen it, so I thought it was one I'd already seen. So Councillor Unsworth, I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry. It's there, as far as the materials go, you've got solid steel. Looking at the plans that on the page, you've got solid steel posts. Is there a requirement from a traffic safety point of view to use the newer, more collapsible and less damaging lattice posts so that they don't pierce cars, windscreens or whatever else that might end up on top of them? Those steel posts will go straight through a windscreen if a car would go on top of them. And I thought the new traffic signs that are out there now have to have the lattice signs. Thank you. Sorry, the lattice posts.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Unsworth, for the question. Again, I'm afraid I'm unable to answer in detail the actual spec of the sign and whether or not that meets specific highway criteria. The only thing I can say is we've consulted Essex County Council as the relevant highway authority for each of the applications and have raised no objections to the proposal. So we have to take from that they have looked at the specification as well as the detail of the sign, i.e. from a distraction to drivers' perspective, but also the details that are available. I think if they had any concerns, they would have raised that within their consultation response. So that's as far as I'm able to answer the question. But again, I hope that provides some clarification.
Councillor Abbott, I'll let you come back.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry to labour this, but that was actually my point. I thought maybe after Mr. Page had spoken, you might come back to me. It wasn't actually the aesthetics I was worried about, it was the highway safety.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott. Well, it has been moved and seconded that we grant these these 19 district council advertisement applications. So I'm going to put that to the vote. Councillor Abbott.
Abstain.
Councillor Bowers.
For.
Councillor Cunningham.
For.
Councillor Horner. Councillor Horner.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
For.
Councillor Mann.
For.
Councillor Monday.
For.
Councillor Mrs. Parker.
For.
Councillor Ritchie.
For.
Councillor Unsworth.
Abstain.
Councillor Wrench.
For.
Councillor Mrs. Spray.
For.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Those 19 applications have been granted. They were granted with 2 abstentions. The remainder were in favour. And that brings us to the end of our applications for this evening. And I would like to thank you all for your attendance, and I will be closing the meeting at 21:14, and I'll hand over to our administrator. Thank you very much for your attendance, and it was the end of the first one we've done this way, and I just hope it's gone well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members, for this evening's meeting. Now, before I ask the webcast team to terminate our broadcast on the Council's YouTube channel, please can I ask all members that they complete the short survey that they'll receive after this meeting. It's very important to us to have your feedback in order to improve our meetings. Could I also advise all parties who have participated in this meeting that the Council will retain performance data relating to your connections to this meeting. This is retained for the purpose of dealing with any legal challenge to the way that this meeting has been held. Thank you very much, and on behalf of the Chairman and members of the Planning Committee, I'd like to end this meeting and ask for the webcasting team to confirm that the broadcast now has ceased. Thank you. The time is now 9:15. Thank you.